Okay, so nobody's getting the truth from the mainstream media, folks. It's well past time to open your eyes, your ears, and your mind. Do your own research because something isn't right here. And if you can't see that, you are not paying attention, folks.
It's the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
The important message that we need Australians to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. In line with that, I do encourage all Australians to please go and book your vaccinations as soon as you can if you haven't already done so.
Emma, get away!
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Okay, we need to stand up against this tyranny, folks. Stop giving away your freedoms and liberties, because the more you give up, the more these people will take until you have absolutely nothing left. That's their agenda.
All right, first thing, guys, we did go live to stop the riot, but anyway, we think we got it shared out there now, and we should be on there. But I told you this could happen soon, and that's why we have Project Matilda, guys. So
Matilda TV.
Matilda TV, yeah, sorry, okay. All right, so look, guys, what we're going to get into it tonight because we got a great guest on here, okay, and the sort of stuff that you people out there love. I've learned a few things watching a couple of his interviews and that I didn't know, and yeah, we love busting this stuff open, and it's about time the rest of the public, if they happen to come across this show, get to understand what's been going on in Australia. But we got Albo up until 2028. I was thinking about that today, guys. He's going to stall you guys. He's going to up your taxes. This is going to be mayhem. Now we got Greta playing her part in the movie over there. We got the Democrats on a $34 million push of destruction. All right. And I was talking to a couple of the Yanks today, and I'll tell you guys, they're hot under the collar, man. They're ready to go. They've had enough. So interesting what's going on. And I was saying you're going to see them going pretty hard. Especially the Marines and the Army or whatever that's in there together, because they'll be competing with each other because that's what they're like. Okay, so it'll be on over there. So exactly where the New World Order wants to take us, guys, down a road of civil unrest. So we just got to watch and see what's going to go on. But let's get Paul straight in here, guys. You've heard of the WASP files. Most of the people on here, I've been sharing it around. If you don't know, well, here's Paul Motor. And, he's the instigator of the WASP file. So welcome, Paul. It's great to have you on here, mate. And firstly, I was watching one of your things. How many people out there know what the WASP actually stands for? Because I thought that was a very interesting way to, have named the series, Paul. And also I realised that from 2014 or 16, you've been into this.
A lot of people ask me, why did I call the channel The WASP Files? And my initial attempt to make a film about the Port Arthur Massacre was called WASP, the Port Arthur Massacre. wasps feature in reality quite a bit during the Port Arthur narrative. Firstly, the shooter, whilst on their way down to the Port Arthur historical site, stopped to help two tourists, two girls whose car had broken down by the side of the road. And he fixed their car and bought a bag of marijuana off them for $50. And they saw the surfboard on his car and said, "Oh, you're going surfing?" And he said, "No, I'm going down to the Isle of the Dead to get rid of some wasps," and which they found quite strange. And ostensibly that reference may have been to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or as the historical term also applies, wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Later, when the shooter entered the Broad Arrow Cafe, he purchased a meal, went out on the balcony, and was seen waving his arms around quite erratically and proclaiming quite loudly, "A lot of wasps around today, not too many Jap tourists." There were European wasps at the cafe on the day. And then much later, when Martin Bryant was interviewed by Inspectors Warren and Payne, he was asked, "Are you aware of European wasps at the Broad Arrow Cafe?" And he replied, "No." And they said, "Do you have any other understanding of the term wasp?" And he said, "No, but I'm allergic to bee stings. I almost died when I was a kid." So for me, the term wasp suggests an ambiguity of motive. If the shooter was going down there with a loudly blatant ideological and racist motivation, which would have been to eliminate white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, then that suggests a very strong ideological bent and a slightly higher intelligence. But Martin Bryant didn't seem to have much understanding of either of those terms, at least when he gave his testimony during the interview.
You said,
and the wasp, unlike a bee, can sting again and again and again. Hence its term.
Well, you said there that he some chicks bought a bag of dope for like $50 and there was a surfboard on the roof. Who are you talking about when you say the shooter? Is this the mimic of Martin Bryant? Did this guy have a car that looked like Martin's with a surfboard on the top? I mean, what's the relevance there?
Well, definitely Martin Bryant's yellow Volvo with the surfboard that was bolted on the top was the vehicle that was used in the assault at the Port Arthur historical site. It was later abandoned at the toll booth. So it was definitely his vehicle. I refer to him as the shooter because at this stage with investigations, the determination of the person who undertook the shooting down at the Port Arthur historical site came into some degree of question. So the shooter, the person who was witnessed by many people, was described as basically being a young man with long blonde hair and a dark coat and driving the yellow Volvo with the surfboard on top. And so that was used to comprehensively identify Martin Bryant as the perpetrator of the shooting.
Caz, you want to come in on it? What's
McGregor, he put a very
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
McGregor, the detective, former detective McGregor, he put out some stuff, and I was watching his stuff, and also I remember Serong, what was his name? Was it Brigadier General Serong? He put out a very comprehensive documents about the Port Arthur shooting, which was against the narrative. So I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't put together about the wasps, though. I hadn't heard that.
Well, an interesting aside to that is that when the shooter mentioned that they were going down to the Isle of the Dead to get rid of some wasps, that indicates that the initial target was not the Broad Arrow Cafe or the Port Arthur historical site itself, but the Isle of the Dead, or the ferry that took tourists over from the shore to the Isle of the Dead. The Isle of the Dead was a little island just off the coast there from the Port Arthur historical site that had a lot of historical graves. And the ferry would take people across there. They would disembark and explore the island and then make their way back to the mainland. there were reports that there were, amongst other tourists and visitors, there were 80 American tourists on board the ferry. So if the shooter had managed to get onto the ferry and then take the ferry across to the Isle of the Dead, which was a little island, there would be nowhere for anyone to escape to, and the kill count would have been a lot higher. However, there was an unpredictable change in the scheduling of the ferry. It had left half an hour earlier, and the shooter had parked the Volvo down near the water's edge and tried to get on the ferry, but it had left earlier, and so they made their way into the Broad Arrow Cafe. But if they'd gotten onto the ferry, particularly if they'd killed 80 American tourists, the worldwide ramifications, particularly in the US, perhaps for gun control, may have been significantly heightened.
That explains something to me, because there was a lady. That explains something, because there was a lady that McGregor said was he believes the handler of the shooter, and when he started in the cafe, she ran towards him, going, "No, not here, not here, not here," as if he had like he'd triggered like there was some sort of like dysfunctional mind control thing happening.
Yes, I'll just correct a few inaccuracies there. So the person that leapt to their feet in the Broad Arrow Cafe when the shooter began opening fire was Anthony Nightingale, and he was witnessed saying, "No, not here," before being shot down. The notion that there may have been, I think handlers is probably not the right term. If you imagine, and we are theorizing, that this was some form of operation where there were operatives involved, then part of that would be to have plans of people that would then witness an event and then be able to say, "I saw this person undertake this activity, climb onto the ferry and begin shooting, and this is my description," etc. If we consider that that was an operation, then it had gone off the rails, because if the ferry was the initial target and had left half an hour earlier, then the shooter had to improvise because the initial target was gone. There were reports that once he entered the cafeteria and ordered the meal, he sat outside on the balcony and was kind of muttering to himself in a very agitated state. So there was an indication that there was a change in plans, for want of a better term. And when the shooting then began in the cafe, perhaps if there were people there that were there as plants to witness the assault on the ferry, they then became inadvertent victims instead. As another addition to that, Johan Overbeek, who's a local Tasmanian figure who was present on the day at the Broad Arrow Cafe, immediately in the aftermath of the shooting in the cafe, one of the witnesses who'd survived the shooting stated that he was seen going through the pockets of the victims in the cafe, which is quite an incredible claim to make. That claim was made by the deceased, the late Wendy Skewer, a lovely lady who had administered triage to the victims in the hours after the shooting at the cafe.
Yeah, I done a space with a very good friend of hers.
Stated that he'd gone through the pockets of the victims. For what reason, we don't know. Ostensibly, it could have been to remove ID or to check ID, but we don't really know.
All right. So can you guys hear me? Have I got a pretty weak signal or something? Yeah.
No, I'm fine. I can't hear you.
You're very low in volume from my point of view.
Okay, sorry about that, Paul. But yeah, there's something. So we've looked into this, and most people on this channel, would say, we believe it was a CIA Mossad type of operation here to actually, get the guns off the Australian people, and that's what a lot of us would believe. But how would the CIA and Mossad, if it was them, how would they actually miss getting to the island? Why was the ferry changed? What was the difference? Like, they would have wanted, these guys are pros, they hit their target. So if they were aiming for the island and a lot of people, what happened? Did it come back to the Broad Arrow Cafe? And what happened, in the setup of Martin, if that was in the background a scene being played out?
Yeah, firstly, I guess before we get to the specifics, it's very important to state that I despise the term conspiracy theorist. What I'm all about, particularly with the WASP files, is asking questions. I don't think there's any problem, and there should never be a problem with asking questions, specifically in the absence of information. And we know that the files have been locked down initially from the 30-year ban by the Hobart Supreme Court, but then that was extended by the Tasmanian Archives and Heritage Office for a further 75 years, which is a combined total of 105 years, where the hard evidence, the ballistics, the DNA, etc., have been locked down by the authorities under the Chief Commissioner's eyes only, no public access. So in terms of making claims about who was involved, particularly when it comes to the CIA and Mossad, I would caution everyone that it's very important. By all means, we can discuss possibilities and theorize, but the main ingredient to discovering the real answers behind Port Arthur is to search for as many hard facts and truth as we can, which is, of course, very difficult. So I don't, at this stage, buy that the CIA or Mossad were involved, simply because I don't have enough evidence to support that claim. I will, however, state that we know that the Central Intelligence Agency and Mossad are two very ruthless intelligence organisations, well renowned throughout the world as carrying out some quite underhand activities, murderous activities, overthrowing of governments, etc. They are certainly capable of being involved in an operation that could be as deadly and heinous as Port Arthur. But I'm yet to see a lot of evidence, hard evidence, that connects Mossad and the CIA to Port Arthur. Having said that, we know that the CIA have their hooks into Australia. They have had that since the 1950s. We have Pine Gap here. We are part of the Five Eyes network, which is an intelligence sharing community between America, Britain, France, Canada, and ourselves. So that makes us that makes them allies. So there is certainly a vested interest for intelligence agencies to be on Australian shores, particularly because China also has got their fingers in Australian pies as well, and they are considered to be the adversaries, if you like, of the Five Eyes nations.
Well, don't panic, Albo's, going to get our harbour back that's been running off to China. He's doing all that. Remember, he said he's going to do all that for us, So, we're in good hands, mate. So, about Port Arthur, what have you, how far are you going with it, Paul? You know what I mean? What's the outcome that you would like to see with Port Arthur? Like, all of us would like the documents out in the open, and we'd be able to have a look at them and determine actually what went on, you know what I mean, under freedom of information. What's your end goal for your obviously lifetime passion of looking into and delving into this, what we would call planned move by the deep state? But, yeah.
Look, I guess to answer that, I found myself on this journey. My initial intention was to make a film about the Port Arthur massacre back in 2016. And back then, all I knew was what everyone else knew, which was that Martin Bryant had gone down to the historical site and killed a lot of people with high-powered semi-automatic rifles. And I began to research before writing the script, which is my job. And I didn't want to just accept what I read online. I wanted to dig very deep, and I did dig deeper than most. I spoke firsthand to a lot of the people that were directly or indirectly involved with Port Arthur, the police, the first responders, the victims, survivors, three of whom were fairly close friends, one of them now deceased. And the more I dug, the deeper I got, the more I couldn't write the script, because I said, this doesn't add up to the mainstream narrative. I'm a scientifically minded person. It's very important for me that people understand I do not make any money out of this. I don't profit from it whatsoever. I'm not a crusader. I'm not a social influencer. I'm not about popularity. The journey that I've taken into Port Arthur is a very grim and torturous one, and is in many ways a thorn in my side. But I found myself on this path, and my sole goal is to educate the general public on what they don't know about the Port Arthur massacre, and the media won't tell them. My end goal is just to provide information so that other people can ask questions and basically come to their own determinations about this horrible tragedy that was one of our blackest days in our nation's history, and make their own minds up about how it all took place and the circumstances and the guilt of the person involved.
Well, that's one part of our history in this country. Sorry, Caz. But what I was going to do was introduce the show in now, Caz, and get Paul's comment on some of the stuff that we have in the studio there. But yeah, you know, it was all, as we see it, you know, part of this setup to get us to exactly where we are now. United States is actually going off its actual head. I've been talking to people over there today. It is not good. They're getting jammed up and ready to go. So, but let's have a look at Australia, Paul, and get your comments, mate.
Before we do, can we comment on the fridge and the body bags, because somebody's just put that comment in. So the mobile fridge was bought prior to the event.
The morgue.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part of the question?
The mobile morgue, it was bought prior to the event?
Yep.
Yeah. I guess I did an episode on the WASP files, which I called, in essence, it was about the many coincidences that seemed to suggest that there was some, if not pre-knowledge or pre-planning of the Port Arthur massacre, but certainly very fortuitous circumstances that had been put into place where they were able to deal with the aftermath of the shooting. One of these, the most infamous, and there are many of these, not just one or two. There are some very odd coincidences which I can race through, but the most infamous one is the famous morgue truck. So Tasmania at the time was, you know, a sleepy community, and you know they had a lot of tourists come down there. And prior to the Port Arthur massacre, the state government had commissioned construction of a 22-person refrigerated morgue truck, which was quite a large vehicle, whose purpose would be to transport under refrigeration a large amount, 22 people. At the time, the commissioning of the vehicle was met with incredulity. People were like, Victoria and New South Wales have much higher death rates than we do. They don't have such a vehicle. But Tasmania built the 22-person morgue truck, and very conveniently, it was on hand after the Port Arthur massacre to be able to transport victims to the mortuary. You would think that after an event of that magnitude, that Tasmania would then hang on to the truck and say, well, it was very valuable and came into its uses. But the vehicle was sold. It was sold by an ex-Special Operations Group police officer by the name of Chris Wright, and advertised as the truck that was used in the massacre that could be used for movie reenactments. So there was an attempt to sell the truck. I don't believe that the carrier itself was sold, but however, the Chevrolet vehicle itself was eventually sold. So it's an odd and very fortuitous decision to make, to have something like that on hand, to be able to meet something as catastrophic as the Port Arthur massacre, where 35 people were killed and 28 injured.
And we also had a gun that come from a police lockup. I mean, wow, really?
Well, yeah, to go on to some of the other coincidences, just before we get to the origins of firearms, which are very cloudy and very murky. Some of the other coincidences, and we'll call them those, were that on the day of the Port Arthur massacre, which was a sunny Sunday, the 28th of April, 1996, the main management heads of the Port Arthur site were called away to attend a conference on the Sunday in Hobart, in essence leaving the site in which they would normally manage it. This had never occurred in 20 years. So the main heads of the Port Arthur Historic Site were not there on the day. Very lucky for them. They were called away for a conference and asked to pack an overnight bag. Very strange occurrence, whereas some of the other employees were required to maintain their duties at the site. Also on the day, there was a journalist conference that was held in Hobart with journalists from all over the world. So there was something like 700 journalists from all over the world attending a conference in Hobart. So immediately, as the news broke about the massacre, there was more journalists than you could imagine on hand instantly to report. Also, there was another conference that was held where there was a number of trauma surgeons from all over Australia who were attending a conference on, in essence, being able to deal with the effects of mass trauma casualty events. So once the massacre, the scale of the massacre became known, very fortuitously, there was a number of high-level surgeons available who had just been briefed on being able to deal with mass casualty traumatic events. The other one was that the Hobart Hospital had just implemented Code Brown. Code Brown was a protocol for the hospital to go into an action mode, once again, relating to a mass influx of trauma victims, to be able to handle, in essence, an overwhelming amount of victims coming from some catastrophe into the hospital. So the Code Brown had just been implemented. We also know that the famous quote that was given by the New South Wales Premier at the time, Barry Unsworth, or some years before, who stormed out of a meeting where the federal government was trying to implement uniform gun laws, and the states were balking at that. There was a lot of dissent amongst that endeavour amongst the states. And he stormed out and was quoted as saying there will never be uniform gun laws in Australia until there's a massacre in Tasmania.
Good old Barry Unsworth.
Anti-gun control advocate Roland Brown also stated in a newspaper article there will be a massacre in Tasmania. This because massacres hadn't really occurred in Australia, but Tasmania and Queensland were known to have more loose gun laws than the others. So there's some of the coincidences that people say, very luckily, and there's many more of them as well. Very luckily, a lot of these motive or a lot of these endeavours were in place to be able to meet the extreme demands made by the level of that catastrophe.
It's interesting, isn't it? I'll just bring up your website here. I've got the YouTube one.
Yeah.
I'll pop it in here. And guys, I shall put this link into there so you guys can go on and have a look.
This was an episode I did on the actions of the media during the massacre and immediately afterwards, and also in the many years afterwards, and it is quite damning. So what's very clear from that episode is that the media took it upon themselves to, shall we say, characterise Martin Bryant by doctoring the photographs that appeared in various publications, and they did this by raising his eyebrows and manipulating his eyes to make him appear wild and crazed. This appeared in the Australian newspaper, and they were called to task on it by Media Watch and gave a very unsatisfactory answer that it was a technical glitch during the printing. There have been many other photos as well where they clearly doctored the image of Martin to portray him as the crazed lone gunman. So the media were certainly up to their tricks with Port Arthur, and one of the most unethical and even unlawful actions in that regards was that while a police officer was distracted at Martin Bryant's home the day after the shooting, somebody broke into his house in Clare Street in Newtown and stole a photograph. And that photograph then ended up on the front page of every major newspaper, proclaiming, "This is the man and the face of a killer." Now, Martin Bryant hadn't even been charged. Now, that is illegal. Any chance of a fair trial and determination of or presumption of innocence before being proven guilty was destroyed because the press took it upon themselves to determine that Martin Bryant was the guilty party the day after he'd been arrested. So that episode was very clearly pointing out how the actions of the media were unethical and in some cases unlawful. And as far as I know, nobody was really charged over that transgression, though they should have been.
Never will be. Never will be until we get the information that we want and have someone press it, Paul. But great work that you're doing, mate. It's a topic that, this is a very touchy topic for the government. Imagine if we got the Australian people to understand this, and then walk them up to 9/11 and back to where I got cut off the radio with Chris Smith this morning. And hopefully that was just a coincidence too. But as soon as he opened his mouth and he mentioned, what was it? The hidden weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and then let me in, and I come back and said, well, the world needs to know that there was none, and went to go on, and he cut me off and went to a news clip. But there's a lot out there that a lot of people want to know.
That's Paul. Just beforehand, you've got here two interesting things which I'm not aware of. Was Martin Bryant's $29 million inheritance the motive, and also that he had a girlfriend months prior?
With the first claim of that, I think, look, it's not been determined. Martin had inherited quite a lot of money from the eccentric Tattersalls heiress Helen Harvey, with whom he had a friendship. It wasn't an intimate relationship; they were friends. She was an eccentric lady, and she had quite a lot of money and took Martin under her wing, so to speak, and they were good friends. And when she passed on, she had left a lot of her estate to Martin Bryant. So he inherited property, including the house at 30 Clare Street in Newtown and a farm, and also cash as well. It was worth something to the tune of about over $500,000. There was some claim that as one of the heirs of the Tattersalls empire, and there were quite a few of these, that technically Martin, as the surviving heir to Helen, may then have been able to make claim on any shares that she had in the Tattersalls fortune. There was mention of 2 packets of shares worth $29 million. That's yet to be determined. So I'm not going to say that was definitely the case, but when they say follow the money trail, once again, when we talk about the motivations for why people do things, greed is certainly one of those motivations. With regard to his girlfriend, Martin is often portrayed as a lonely, isolated and ostracized personality. But even the film Nitram, which was, a drama that was made here in Australia depicting Martin in that way, was totally inaccurate in that sense, because Martin had girlfriends, and he was in love with a lady by the name of Petra Wilmot, a young lady who he was with 3 months before the Port Arthur massacre, right up to the night before and in the morning. The night before, they went out dancing at a nightclub. They came home, they showered together, spent the night, and then departed the next morning. So Martin had a girlfriend who he loved, and you would imagine that would make him, reasonably a happy person and not so much lonely and isolated. When Petra was interviewed by Ray Martin on one of the programs, she said, "Why did you fall in love with him?" And she answered, "Because he was gentle and kind and looked after me." So that sort of flies in the face of Martin.
Sorry, have you personally spoken to Martin Bryant? Have you been able to actually sit down with Martin or not?
No, I tried to contact Martin Bryant. I sent a letter with an attached self-addressed envelope to the Risdon prison for Martin Bryant's attention, with a letter stating that I wanted to talk to him. And I said, you don't even have to talk about Port Arthur, but I'd be interested to talk to you. And if you grant me permission by sending me back the letter, we can arrange a meeting. I didn't hear anything for many months, and I was chasing it up through the Risdon prison system, and I received a letter from Risdon saying, your letter has been seized as a risk to prison security. So Martin had never even seen it. I then also followed up with inquiries as to how does one get to visit an inmate in the prison system, and you can do so as either media or as a personal contact. Now, because I wasn't media per se, I was trying to get the parameters of what the requirement would be before I received another letter saying your request to visit Martin Bryant has been denied on both a media and personal level, and I hadn't even formally applied. So the walls came down. It's very important to note, and I hope everyone takes this on board, that the media, who were very quick to decry the guilt of Martin Bryant and their knowledge of the circumstances of the case, not one reporter has interviewed Martin Bryant in the 29 years since he's been incarcerated at Risdon Prison, not one. And you would think that they would jump at the chance to get the straight from the horse's mouth, the exclusive, get his confession that they, very loudly proclaim, but not one of them has been able to interview him. They also haven't had access to any of the hard evidence that's been locked away till 2091, the ballistics, the fingerprints, the DNA, nor have they interviewed crucial witnesses such as Graham Collier, Wendy Skewer, Jim Laycock, Roger Lana, John Godfrey, all who tendered witness statements. Some of these are good friends of mine, who contradict the mainstream narrative and say the person who shot them wasn't Martin Bryant. Never been interviewed by the shows like the ABC's I Was Actually There, nor have they had to say in court because we had no open trial. And they are considered what, under law, they would be considered to be exculpatory evidence, which must be tendered when you're hearing a crime. There must be, the opposing evidence has to be submitted.
Can I just put the boot in? Because, hey, let's just give the boot to the project while we can, because Wally Seed done a real number on you back in the day. All right, I remember on the project, and the project's been wiped out now. So goodbye, Wally. But they took your interview down, I heard, from about 12 minutes down to 1.5 minutes. Wally was an absolute wanker and jumped all over you when you tried to talk about stuff. So, yeah, what do you got to say to the project? And you don't mind, put the slipper in. We're Aussies. We can take it. It's all good. Although Wally ain't.
Look, I'm a little more media savvy than most people think. The media is a double-edged sword. I knew what the project would do when they invited me on there. So I wisely got online beforehand and put a post up saying, I've been invited to speak on the project with Waleed Ali. Let's see how they butcher this up. And of course they did. The interview was actually 14 minutes long and they cut it down to 1.5. I once described Waleed, as I've said, perhaps a little harshly, as one of the legion of bleach teeth infomercial salesmen masquerading as journalists, and that his comic diatribe on serious issues was vomitous, which may have had some impact on the way I was treated. So, yeah, I mean, Waleed Ali is not very popular amongst a lot of the media. And after the episode aired and it was cut down, and yes, they brutally butchered it. And there were moments when I gave them hell. I gave as good as I got. At one point, I could see what they were doing, and I said, look, if you're trying to pin me down and say this film that I intend to do is a conspiracy-based film, it is not. And there was silence. But of course, they cut that from the interview. The full transcript is available to download from the media episode. So you can see for yourself. I ripped them to pieces. And at the end of that interview, I was sitting in a remote studio. They were stunned because they realized that they didn't really have anything to pin me down on. Waleed Ali, yeah, he was it's one of those cases where the media should be. The whole point of it is objectivity, balance, and fairness. I was invited to speak about my endeavours, but it was a case of, if we want your opinion, we'll give it to you. You know, just talking over the top of you, accusing you, and then censoring anything I said that was rational and reasonable and logical. So that's where the media, come under a lot of criticism and scrutiny, because I am, happy that show has been axed, because it was atrociously biased, and there's been many claims where the project has just run ramshot over the guests that they've invited onto the program.
Yeah, they did that with the vaccine lady as well too, I think. Paul, how do we go forward with the media in Australia? Because it is actually just quintessentially extremely bad, especially if you look at, like, the ABC, they do similar things there as well. And so how do we get control of our media so that they're actually unbiased?
An interesting development very recently is that my channel, The Wasp Files, has gained quite a significant traction and a momentum. And suddenly, you may have noticed, the ABC show, I was actually there with the Port Arthur episode, was replayed just about 4 nights ago. And then there was a flurry of Murdoch press on all the papers, where they'd suddenly come out with more information that proved Martin Bryant's motivation as to why he did it. And some of the reporting was quite odious. They were saying, he's so overweight, he needs 3 mattresses to sleep on. And, it's the journalistic equivalent of calling him poopy pants. They just were vitriolic, and suddenly there's this huge flurry of media activity, which is very coincidental to the fact that the Wasp Files is gaining some kind of traction. So the media, to answer your question, I guess the best way to describe that is the media work in step with the government, and they basically, it's sort of an uneasy alliance. You do for me, I do for you, and we're fed what we're fed, and then the government can then rely on that and say, well, look, the media reports say this, therefore we're going to introduce this legislation. We are, in essence, we get a fraction of what goes on in the whole world, and particularly in Australia. We know that the media has an agenda, in essence, to sell copy and advertising. So they're very much told what to do, and they toe the company line. And the government works in with that, because the media is a very powerful weapon. It's all about the information. If you control the information that goes out to the main general public, then you control people, you control the narrative, you control the story.
It's interesting. Yep. It's interesting because they're all up in arms at the moment, because there was a reporter shot in LA, and they seem to have forgotten this little moment when the Australian government, or the Victorian police, actually opened fire on the protesters with rubber bullets. So,
well, I mean, it's. I just find that they're hypocritical in many ways. That on the one hand, they seem to proclaim that they're there for the greater good, but then they will, in essence, be very biased in regards to certain issues. With regards, for instance, to the reporting that Martin's an obese person who needs 3 mattresses. Interestingly enough, I put a post about a Channel 9 report about an Indigenous Australian who was given so much food and medication that he gained an obese weight and died, and there was a coronial inquest into his death. And there was outrage about why an inmate would be made to be so obese that he would die. But of course, that's outrageous. But then when the media reports on Martin Bryant, he's Porky Pig, the term they literally reported that the guards call him. So that's hypocrisy, and the media are very good at it. They'll strum the fiddle, the violin, when it suits them, but they can be very ruthless and cutting when it doesn't suit an agenda. I'm not here to go to war with the media. The media serve a purpose, but I do, of course, encourage everyone to ask questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, particularly in the absence of information, which is what I'm doing, and to go to alternate sources. Just talk to people, hear the other side. There's always two sides to a story. The whole Israel-Gaza conflict alone has polarized opinions throughout the media and throughout the government and throughout the general public. But are we getting the full story, or are we getting the story they want us to follow?
Usually the one that they want us to follow.
Yeah, look, we're being taken out by a song that has been dedicated to Dazzle because it's 12 months since she died. And so, Paul, lovely having you on here. Very excellent explanations. If you'd like to have some final words, and Dave, if you'd like to wrap up and close the show, that'd be awesome.
Look, I guess I want to thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to talk. As I said, I'm not here to allege anything or to make any determinations. I don't have the answers. The people that have the answers are the people that have locked down the evidence that's on file. Till 2091, most of us will be dead before that information is released. So all I'm doing is trying to dig as deeply as I can to provide people with as much information that I can find and educate them on what they don't know about Port Arthur, so they can make their own minds up from an informed point of view. Any topics that people discuss, whether it's 9/11, the JFK assassination, anything that, the detractors of the world are very quick to say tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. They need to slow down and stop and understand that all these people are doing is asking questions because they don't have the answers, or they're not satisfied with the answers that the government and the media give them. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I encourage anyone who thinks, that it's just rubbish and garbage, and I get a lot of, vitriol in relation to that, do your research. I've researched this for 9 exhaustive years. Read, examine, talk to people, and then you may just get a slightly wider perspective that will change your opinion.
Thank you very much, Paul. All right. And guys, no media coverage on, on the truth. And it's the same as what we're about to go and do now. It's been a year since we lost young Dazzle. We fought hard. Ryan Park, blood on your hands, mate. You're still the state health minister. You are still responsible, as we see it, all right, for not giving this girl the treatment that she needed. Why? Because she was a 14-year-old that you wanted vaccinated before she could get her double lung transplant. Now, here we are. Your own government, Ryan Park, has put out a memo hidden in your little website, not put out to the public, the media again, because you won't cover it, media, but we will. All right, that it's not recommended under 18-year-olds. So I think there's a big lawsuit there, actually. I really think there's a big lawsuit, and I wish Josh and his wife and his family all the best in attacking these guys from a legal perspective. All right, they've now admitted that it shouldn't have been done. You held a young child from getting a transplant that she needed, right, because of your tyrannical frigging WEF rules. So before I say too much, I'll shut it there. All right, but thank you to Josh and his wife. Thank you to Dazzle for what you've done. And, you're up there with little Jessie now, and you're having a great time. I know that. Love you, Dazzle. Thank you, Paul. Night, Caz. Thanks, Mel.
A new day is dawning on this broken world. The dreams of many gone aside, but we can find inspiration where we might least expect, in the heart and courage of a child. So don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. Take one more step when you can. Don't give up on your dreams. give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. Take one more step when you can. Don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. My prayer for you is hope renewed. Don't give up on your dreams. Lest we forget you now, the twinkle in your eyes, your faithfulness, your thoughtfulness, the dazzle in your smile. So don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. Take one more step when you can. Don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your dreams. We can hear you say, don't give up on your dreams. My prayer for you is hope renewed. Don't give up on your dreams.